This NFL season just keeps getting crazier and crazier, guys. Teams that I thought were no longer in contention for the playoffs have suddenly reemerged from the dead. Players who I thought maybe weren't working out this year have suddenly turned it up to an elite level. And guys who were playing elite may not be at that level anymore. This is the Sports Ball Network's NFL Week 14 breakdown, and we got a lot to go over, so let's get right into it. Things finally worked out for the Patriots here on Thursday night as they kicked off the week with a 21-18 victory over the now 7-6 Pittsburgh Steelers. New England, now 30-10, is still not a very good team, but at this point, any win is good for them. Bailey Zappi, 240 yards and 3 touchdowns in the air to go along with an interception. Ezekiel Elliott, 68 yards on the ground, 72 through the air on 7 receptions and a touchdown. Juju even got in on the action here. He had 6 receptions for 90 yards through the air. And Hunter Henry, 3 receptions, 40 yards, 2 touchdowns. The defense, an interception, 2 sacks. Uh, this game was a classic Belichick game. He was up against the wall. He really needed to win, and the team just rallied behind him and grinded one out. As for the Steelers, they fall to 7-6. They have been struggling as of late. Their playoff position is very much in danger with an AFC that has 11 teams over 500. And with Mitchell Trubisky quarterbacking them, I'm not sure if they're going to be able to make it here, guys. Speaking of Trubisky, he had 190 yards, a touchdown, as well as a 2-point conversion and an interception in the air. 8 carries, 30 yards on the ground to go along with the score, but really he looked uncomfortable all night long. The defense also for Pittsburgh looked relatively uncomfortable. 1 interception, 2 sacks. They should have done much better against a very weak New England offense. And if there is a year for Mike Tomlin's Steelers to go under 500, this one might be it. This team's hurting, they're struggling, and I can't really envision them winning many more of their games with the way that they're playing right now. Sunday's slate of games kicked off with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers beating the Atlanta Falcons 29-25. Both teams are now 6-7, but it is Tampa Bay who would make the playoffs if the season ended today. Baker Mayfield did just enough. He was 14 for 29 passing, 144 yards, 2 touchdowns through the air, as well as a touchdown on the ground. Sean White was the star of the show here. 25 carries, 102 yards on the ground, 2 receptions for 33 yards and a touchdown. He's been fantastic all season, and I'm really excited to see what he can do next year, another year in the system. Chris Godwin was surprisingly the leading receiver here this week. 5 receptions for 53 yards. Mike Evans, meanwhile, dud. 1 reception for 8 yards. I expect him, of course, to bounce back, but this goes to show that Tampa can do it without their top pass catcher. The defense had an interception, 3 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and a safety, just terrorizing Atlanta all game long. And really, of the NFC South teams, I've said as of late that the Buccaneers and the Saints look like the two best teams in the division. So really, it's not surprising to see the Bucs now in the position that they are. Atlanta falls out of the playoff picture. They are still in the wild card hunt in the NFC. There are a bunch of teams at 6-7 in the NFC, so they are technically very much alive for both the division and the wild card. Desmond Ridder, 347 yards and touchdown, as well as a 2-point conversion in the air and interception, 15 yards and a touchdown on the ground. He had a pretty good game here. Wasn't enough, but it, given where he was earlier, it's encouraging to see. Bijan Robinson, only 34 yards and a touchdown on the ground, but he did have 5 receptions, 54 yards. Drake London, 10 receptions, 172 yards, and a 2-point conversion in the air. He was fantastic. Love to see that from him after his early season struggles. Kyle Pitts, 3 receptions, 57 yards, and a touchdown. glad to see him a bit more involved as well. Defense, unfortunately, did not do much for Atlanta. That's why they lost this game, a sack and a forced fumble. But Atlanta does get Carolina next week, so I expect them to bounce back from this one. And because of that, they will be 7-7, most likely, and still very much in the playoff hunt in the NFC. The LA Rams gave the AFC leading Baltimore Ravens everything they had. And unfortunately for LA, it was not enough as they fell 37-31 in overtime on a punt return for a touchdown. The Rams, led by quarterback Matthew Stafford, were really good on offense. Stafford, 294 yards, 3 touchdowns in the air. Kyren Williams on the ground, 114 yards, 3 receptions, but he was not able to get anything. He actually lost a yard through the air. Cooper Kupp, 8 receptions, 115 yards and touchdown. Puka Nacua has continued his fantastic rookie season, 5 receptions, 84 yards. Just the LA Ram offense was phenomenal. They continue to play like this, they will firmly remain in the NFC hunt. And if their defense, which had an interception, 2 sacks, and a safety, continues to play like they do, this team could be dangerous and possibly snag one of those NFC playoff spots. Baltimore at 10-3 leads the AFC, like I mentioned before. Lamar was fantastic, 316 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a 2-point conversion in the air. He did have that interception, but doesn't really matter. He was great all game long, 70 yards on the ground as well. Keaton Mitchell continues an impressive emergence in his rookie season. 9 carries for 54 yards and an 8-yard reception as well. Hopefully, he gets more involved in the offense. Zay Flowers, 6 receptions, 60 yards, a touchdown, as well as a 2-point conversion. He was great. Odell, 4 receptions, 97 yards, and a touchdown. Isaiah Likely filling in for Mark Andrews, 5 receptions, 83 yards, and a touchdown. The Baltimore defense, 2 sacks, and obviously that special teams touchdown. Just great football from Baltimore. There's a reason why they are the top team in the AFC right now. They are playing the best football in a very, very good division, a very good conference. And given that there are only 4 weeks left and the rest of the top AFC teams look like they are struggling a little bit, it would not surprise me if Baltimore ends up locking that #1 seed for the end of the year. For whatever reason, it seems like the 2023 Chicago Bears have the answer to the 2023 Detroit Lions. Once again, Chicago played Detroit very well, and this time, unlike last time, they ended up winning this game 28-13. Chicago, now 5-8, was led by an electric Justin Fields who completed 19 of his 33 passes for 223 yards and a touchdown, as well as running for 58 yards and a touchdown on the ground. Dante Foreman had 50 yards on the ground and 2 receptions for 22 yards. DJ Moore continues his torrid pace, 3 rushing attempts for 20 yards and touchdown, 6 receptions, 68 yards and touchdown, just absolutely fantastic. Cole Kmet, 5 receptions, 66 yards. He's great. The Bears defense suddenly has turned around, 2 interceptions, 4 sacks, and a fumble recovery. Just this unit looks like it's a top 10 unit, or at least it has been over the past few weeks. And at 5-8, Chicago is very much alive in the NFC playoff picture here. But don't count them out. For Detroit, they moved down to 9-4. Jared Goff had a terrible game. 161 yards and touchdown to go along with 2 interceptions in the air. He also had a fumble on the ground. Jahmyr Gibbs, 66 yards and touchdown on the ground. David Montgomery, 66 yards on the ground as well. Amon-Ra St. Brown surprisingly struggled. 3 receptions for 21 yards. That's it. Sam Laporta, 2 receptions for 23 yards. Just a bad day for the Detroit Lions offense. The defense had 3 sacks and a blocked field goal, but of course allowed 28 points to a Chicago Bears offense that's been inconsistent all year. Just a bad game for Detroit. One that they are going to absolutely need to bounce back from, but one that might cause a little bit of a late season slump, especially if they are unable to get past the now surging Denver Broncos next week. The Cincinnati Bengals beat the Indianapolis Colts to move to 7-6 on the season, winning 34-14 in just dominant fashion. The Bengals suddenly find themselves in a huge tie with a bunch of other teams in the AFC for those last two playoff spots. Jake Browning has led this team admirably. In the absence of Joe Burrow, he has thrown for 275 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception in this game. Also ran for 7 yards and touchdown on the ground. Joe Mixon, fantastic, 79 yards and touchdown on the ground, 3 receptions, 46 yards. Chase Brown had a breakout performance, 25 yards on the ground to go along with 3 receptions for 80 yards and a touchdown in the air. T. Higgins, 2 receptions, 72 yards. Tanner Hudson, 2 receptions, 23 yards and a touchdown. The defense, an interception, 3 sacks, and a fumble. Just a good game by the Bengals, who suddenly find themselves very much alive and in a position that I did not think they would be in once Joe Burrow's season ended. Gardner Minshew, meanwhile, for Indianapolis, who is also now 7-6, threw for 240 yards, a touchdown, and a 2-point conversion. He did have an interception, though, ran for 5 yards on the ground. Zach Moss, filling in for Jonathan Taylor, struggled in this game, 28 yards, 4 receptions, 28 yards. Michael Pittman was fantastic, 8 receptions, 95 yards, 2-point conversion. It seems like even with things starting to collapse around the Colts, Michael Pittman's just always going to be there. He's going to get his production in. Just a great player. The defense and interception did have a touchdown on the defensive side of the ball, though. Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen with this Colts team. They looked to be competitive for most of the year, even with rookie phenom Anthony Richardson going down. But at 7-6, they are also in that huge group of AFC teams fighting for those last two playoff spots. And just given that there are teams like the Bills, like the Steelers, and like these Bengals still behind them, I'm not sure I can say with confidence that they're going to make it in the playoffs by the time the season ends. The Cleveland Browns, led by elite quarterback Joe Flacco, ended up moving to 8-5 on the season, beating the 8-5 Jacksonville Jaguars 31-27 in a shootout. Joe Flacco, since he's filled in the past 2 weeks, has guided this Cleveland offense very smoothly. 311 yards to go along with 3 touchdowns and an interception on the air for him. He did lose a fumble on the ground, but ultimately he was extremely efficient. He distributed the ball well, and he made great throws throughout this game. Jerome Ford, 51 yards on the ground, 5 receptions, 31 yards in the air. Amari Cooper, 7 receptions, 77 yards. He also lost a fumble, though. Even Njoku had a breakout performance, 6 receptions, 91 yards, 2 touchdowns. Just a great game by him. This Browns defense, still a top 5 unit, 3 interceptions, a forced fumble, 4 sacks. Just Cleveland's a really good team. We've talked about it all year long on this channel. They were my favorites for the AFC North because of the talent. And even despite the injuries that they've had and the number of quarterbacks they've had to start this year, it really seems like this team is going to make the playoffs, probably as the 5 or the 6 seed. Technically, they still have a chance to win their division. I don't think that's likely at this point, though. Baltimore's 2 games ahead. They have 4 games left to play. But Cleveland looks to be a good team, a playoff team, and a tough out for anyone. Jacksonville, of course, fell to 8-5. They're only a game ahead of the Texans and the Colts in their division. That's something to watch. Trevor Lawrence, of course, I mentioned he had those 3 interceptions. He also had 3 touchdowns and 257 yards in the air. Travis Etienne, 35 yards and a touchdown on the ground, 4 receptions, 37 yards. None of the Jacksonville pass catchers, aside from Evan Ingram, really stepped up. He had 11 receptions for 95 yards and 2 touchdowns. This game was just a great one for the tight ends. The defense for Jacksonville, an interception, a sack, 2 fumbles. Jacksonville just ran into a good Cleveland team. They did not play their best football today, and they lost. Of course, this loss could have major ramifications. I mentioned earlier they're only a game ahead of 2 teams in their division. But I still think Jacksonville's a good team. I still think they'll make the playoffs. However, that's much less a guarantee because of this game and because of this loss than a couple of weeks ago. The New Orleans Saints moved to a three-way tie for first place in the NFC South, beating up the hapless Carolina Panthers 28-6. Let's talk about the Panthers here first because there's really not much to say here. Bryce Young, we've mentioned before, has struggled all year. He did not look very good in this game. He was only 13 for 36 passing for 137 yards. He did rush for 40 yards on the ground, but lost a fumble. He looks lost right now, and honestly, I don't know if his NFL career is going to work out, but clearly something is going to have to change in Carolina if he has a shot of success next year. Uh, Chuba Hubbard, 87 yards on the ground. Miles Sanders, 74 yards on the ground. That's at least something good that Carolina can hang their hat on. They did have a decent rushing day here. Adam Thielen had an okay day, 5 receptions, 74 yards. Really, just nothing else to note. The Carolina Panther defense had an interception and a sack. Played terribly all game long. This Panthers team is bad. It's just bad. And if you have to watch them play football, you are not in for a good time. The Saints, meanwhile, led by quarterback Derek Carr, had not a very good day on offense. Derek Carr, 119 yards in the air, 2 touchdowns, and interception. Didn't really need to do much, though. Alvin Kamara, 56 yards and touchdown on the ground. Kamara, though, had negative 11 receiving yards on 3 receptions. That's definitely one of the weirder stat lines of this season. Chris Olave, 4 receptions, 28 yards, and a touchdown. He also has an injury now with his ankle. That's something to monitor next week. Jimmy Graham caught a touchdown. Also had 2 receptions, 16 yards. The Saints defense, though, really carried them in this one. 4 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, 2 recoveries, and a touchdown. We mentioned last week that the Saints defense really needed to step up if they have any hopes of really winning this division, and it seems like they took that to heart because that's what they did. Now they are tied with the Falcons and the Bucks in a three-way battle for first place in the NFC South. They also are tied with a bunch of other teams in the NFC for that final wild card spot. So New Orleans, like the Bucks, like Atlanta, still very much alive in this thing, both for a wild card spot and for their division. How about that? MetLife had another victim this week, and it was the Houston Texans, as 5 players on this team got hurt in a 30-6 loss, including star rookie quarterback CJ Stroud, star wide receiver Nico Collins, and star defensive end Will Anderson. Uh, the Texans just had a terrible, terrible day. CJ Stroud, I mentioned, got hurt. Before then, he was 10 for 23 for only 91 yards in the air. No one on this team had more than 35 receiving yards. Devin Singletary on the ground, only 65 yards. He did have a touchdown. Dameon Pierce, 9 yards. Just a terrible, terrible game for Houston. Did have 4 sacks and a fumble, but ultimately doesn't really matter when everyone on your team is hurt and you lose. Meanwhile, for the Jets, Zach Wilson showed everybody why he should have been starting the past couple of weeks. He threw for 301 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was great, guys. And honestly, I feel justified. I've mentioned before, I didn't exactly understand the decision to bench him. I thought Zach had shown growth and some potential he hasn't in seasons past. And clearly in this game, he proved me right. Breece Hall, 10 carries, 40 yards, 8 receptions, 86 yards, and a touchdown. Great game for him. Garrett Wilson, 9 receptions, 108 yards, go along with a 3-yard rush. The defense, 5 sacks. Just this game was needed by the Jets. They are 2 games back from the playoffs. I doubt they make it in, but this is a great game in terms of momentum, stopping their skid, and giving the team some much needed confidence to finish out the season on a high note. Kicking off the afternoon slate of games, the Minnesota Vikings and Las Vegas Raiders played in a football stadium. At least that's what I think they did. I don't think I've ever seen a game like this one. The Vikings somehow won 3-0. They were not able to do anything all day long, but that didn't matter because the Raiders were somehow worse. Joshua Dobbs, 63 yards in the air, and he was benched as well. Nick Mullins, 83 yards in the air. Ty Chandler, 35 yards on the ground. Alexander Madison, 66 yards, but he is hurt. He's probably going to be out a couple weeks. Justin Jefferson, 2 receptions, 27 yards. He left this game and went to the hospital to make sure his ribs weren't broken. Uh, it was a bruise, luckily. It seems like he's going to play next week. But TJ Hawkinson, 53 yards on 5 receptions. Just terrible, terrible game. The defense, though, did great. An interception, 4 sacks, and 2 fumble recoveries. Greg Joseph also 1 for 2, scoring this game's only points in a field goal. Yeah, I don't know how the Vikings are 7-6. I don't know how they won this game, but they did, and they are in the playoffs as the 6th seed as a result right now in the NFC. Aiden O'Connell for the Raiders, 171 yards and an interception through the air. Josh Jacobs, 34 yards on the ground. He has a knee injury. He's questionable for this upcoming Thursday night game that the Raiders have. Devontae Adams, 7 receptions, 53 yards. The defense, 5 sacks, nothing else of note. This game is not fun. Let's move on. With their 28-16 victory over the Seattle Seahawks, the San Francisco 49ers officially clinched their playoff spot in the NFC. Brock Purdy, 368 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. He's fantastic. Might be leading the MVP race now. Christian McCaffrey, 145 yards on the ground. Fantastic day by him. Deebo Samuel, 7 receptions, 149 yards, and a touchdown, as well as a rushing touchdown on the ground. Brandon Ayuk, 6 receptions, 126 yards. He did lose a fumble. Ultimately didn't matter. George Kittle, 3 receptions, 76 yards, and a touchdown. And defense, 2 interceptions, 4 sacks. Just there's a reason why San Francisco is the 1 seed right now in the NFC. There's a reason why they were the first team to clinch the playoffs. They are really, really, really good. And I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking about this team in February as the possible Super Bowl winners. Seattle, meanwhile, falls to 6-7. Drew Lock started this game. Gino was out with an injury. He threw for 269 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Mixed day from him. Kenneth Walker, 21 yards on the ground, 4 receptions, 33 yards. Zach Charbonnet, 44 yards on the ground. Tyler Lockett, 6 receptions, 89 yards. DK Metcalf, 2 receptions, 52 yards, and a touchdown. The defense, interception, 3 sacks, forced fumble, and recovery. It's not like Seattle's a bad team. They ran into a really good San Francisco team. Not much you can really do there except try to win the game as much as you can. But they are still in the playoffs. They are still very much alive in the playoff picture in a weak NFC, even at 6-7. And I would not be surprised if the Seattle team bounces back next week. The Buffalo Bills had a must-win situation going into this game against Kansas City. They did end up winning 20-17 on the back of Josh Allen, who had 233 yards and a touchdown in the air. He did have an interception as well, but he also had 32 yards and a touchdown on the ground. James Cook, 58 yards on the ground, 5 receptions, 83 yards and a touchdown. He's been really good in his second year in this offense. Stephon Diggs struggled a little bit, 4 receptions, 24 yards, thinking he's going to bounce back next week. Dalton Kincaid, 5 receptions, 21 yards, same for him. The defense, an interception, a sack, and a fumble recovery against the Kansas City offense. And suddenly, Buffalo is 7-6 and tied with a bunch of teams in the AFC for those final playoff spots. I mentioned earlier, I do think this Buffalo team is too talented to miss the playoffs. I still think that stands. And it's games like this that make me think that by the end of the year, we'll be talking about Buffalo playing in the wild card round. For Kansas City, Patrick Mahomes struggled in this game, 271 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. But that's not what people are going to remember. They're going to remember him screaming on the sidelines after the Kadarius Toney penalty, which was a penalty. He was clearly off sides. They're going to remember Patrick Mahomes telling Josh Allen that he did not think the call was right. But ultimately, it doesn't matter. They ended up losing this game. So Patrick Mahomes is just going to have to bounce back next week. Derek McKinnon filling in for Isaiah Pacheco, 19 yards and a touchdown on the ground, 3 receptions, 18 yards. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 39 yards on the ground as well. They really miss Pacheco here. G. Rice continues his breakout, 7 receptions, 72 yards and a touchdown. He did lose a fumble, though. Travis Kelce, 6 receptions, 83 yards. The defense, the interception, 3 sacks. Just it wasn't enough for Kansas City. And suddenly, at 8-5, Kansas City is at risk of losing this division. Who to? Well, we'll talk about them right now. How about the 7-6 Denver Broncos, who beat the Los Angeles Chargers 24-7 to move within a single game of the division-leading Kansas City Chiefs? Russell Wilson continues his bounce-back year, 224 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception through the air. Javonte Williams, 66 yards, a touchdown on the ground, 3 receptions, 25 yards. He's been great. Cortland Sutton caught another touchdown, no surprise. 3 receptions, 62 yards in the air as well. The defense continues its resurgence in interceptions, 6 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and a fumble recovery. This unit has been playing lights out, and really they have redeemed themselves since that embarrassment against Miami. It's really inspiring to see, actually. Speaking of the Denver Broncos and Miami, could we possibly be seeing them play in the playoffs against each other? Could we see that rematch? Who knows? Perhaps we could, or perhaps we could see suddenly steal the division away from Kansas City. They did split in their series, and it seems like Denver is performing just as well as the Chiefs as of late. A lot of uncertainty in the AFC West and the playoffs because of Denver, and quite honestly, I love to see it. The Chargers, meanwhile, fall to 5-8. Justin Herbert out for the year with a fractured finger. He's going to need surgery. Very unfortunate. Had 96 yards and an interception before he left. Easton Stick filling in 179 yards and a fumble. Austin Eckler did have a bounce back, though. 51 yards and a touchdown on the ground. 5 receptions, 49 yards in the air. Keenan Allen, 6 receptions, 68 yards. He is out, though, Thursday with a heel injury. This Chargers team is really hurting right now. The defense, the interception, 2 sacks. If you want to note, though, that rookie Quentin Johnston, who's been struggling all year, did have a good game, 3 receptions, 91 yards. Hopefully he continues to emerge. But for Los Angeles, this season seems lost. I would be shocked if the team does not change something going into next year. And this team's too talented to be 5-8 where they are right now. It's not really acceptable to their team, to their fans. And I would not be surprised if major things happen in Los Angeles following the season. I refuse to believe that there was a Sunday night football game played in Dallas. You want to know why? Because only one team showed up to the stadium, and it was not the Philadelphia Eagles. The Dallas Cowboys, now in first place in the NFC East, beat the brakes off of Philadelphia 33-13 in the rematch. Dak was phenomenal, 271 yards and 2 touchdowns in the air. He did lose a fumble, but doesn't matter. They won. Tony Pollard, 59 yards on the ground, 7 receptions, 37 yards. Nobody wanted to cover CeeDee Lamb, 6 receptions, 71 yards, and a touchdown. Michael Gallup, 3 receptions, 48 yards, and a touchdown. Jake Ferguson was wide open all day long, 5 receptions, 72 yards. The Dallas defense sacked 3 fumble recoveries. The Dallas kicker, Brandon Aubrey, the rookie, hit 4 field goals, including a 60-yarder. He's had a fantastic season and an amazing, amazing start to his career. He has not missed a field goal yet, I believe. He's 30 for 30. Uh, just he is a great kicker, and we might be seeing something special there with him. Dallas was just a better team. I don't really want to talk about the Eagles right now. They have disappointed me immensely, but I shall. Jalen Hurts, 197 yards in the air, 30 yards on the ground, and a lost fumble. DeAndre Swift, 39 yards on the ground. He was not able to do anything. A.J. Brown had a good game, though, for the most part. 9 receptions, 94 yards, and a lost fumble. Devonta Smith also lost a fumble, no surprise. 5 receptions, 73 yards. It seems like everybody on the Eagles were fumbling Sunday night. Dallas Goedert in his return, 4 receptions, 30 yards. The defense, 3 sacks, forced fumble, and the only touchdown for Philadelphia in this game. The Eagles are now the 5 seed. They still technically control their destiny. If they win out and Dallas wins out, Philadelphia would win the division. But this is not good. The Eagles have had their fair share of struggles this year. We've talked about it on this weekly series. They do not look like the same team that made it to the Super Bowl last year. The offense seems off, the defense seems off, everything seems off in Philadelphia. And if they want to really make noise in the playoffs, come January, come February, they need to figure things out and they need to do it fast. Going Monday Night Football, there was no team in NFL history that ended up winning the game when they were down 14 points or more with 3 minutes or less to go. Leaving Monday Night Football, there is now one team that has won a game, being down 14 points or more with 3 minutes or less to go. That was the Tennessee Titans, who in a stunning, stunning game ended up beating the Miami Dolphins 28-27 off of a crazy last second comeback. The Titans, now 5-8, were led by rookie quarterback Will Levis, who arguably had his best game of his young career. 327 yards, a touchdown, and a 2-point conversion in the air to go along with an interception. Derrick Henry ran for 2 scores in the comeback effort. Tajay Spears, 6 receptions, 89 yards in the air as well. DeAndre Hopkins, great game, 7 receptions, 124 yards, and a touchdown. The tight end, Conquo, 5 receptions, 46 yards. The defense, 5 sacks, and a blocked field goal. This Tennessee Titans team showed everyone why they were considered a pretty good team going into the year. Things might not have gone their way entirely, but they still have a lot of fight in them. They will still compete, and they absolutely will ruin your season if they get the chance to do so. Miami Dolphins fall out of the number 1 seed in the AFC. They are now 4. Tua struggled in this game, 240 yards, but really was not able to get anything going in the air. Raheem Mostert had a great game, though, 96 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground. He was awesome. Achane, 47 yards on the ground as well. Jalen Waddle had a good game, 6 receptions, 79 yards. Tyreek Hill, 4 receptions, 61 yards. He had an ankle injury, but he was able to come back and play in this game. The defense, an interception, a sack, but ultimately was lackluster in those final 3 minutes where they ended up losing the game. Miami has been an inconsistent team all year despite their record. They have not really performed very well against actual good teams like the Eagles or the Bills. This game might be one that they want back. It's rough to lose in the NFL. It's especially rough to lose when you're competing for the 1 seed and the coveted bye in the playoffs. Miami might have to play in wild card weekend because of this one. And as we've seen this season, there are a lot of dangerous teams in the AFC. If this game comes back to bite Miami, it'll be because they do play in wild card weekend and perhaps they might lose that game. Then again, this is Miami, the same team that dropped 70 points on a very decent Broncos team early on in the season. So who knows what we're going to get. Uh, but to me, it just feels like after watching this game, after watching Miami, that they just aren't quite there yet. Who knows? That could change, but that's just what I think right now. And if you had to ask me today if I think the Miami Dolphins could make a lot of noise in the playoffs, my answer would probably be no. Our final game of the week on the Monday Night Football doubleheader also saw a major comeback. The New York Giants, led by rookie undrafted free agent quarterback Tommy DeVito, ended up beating the Green Bay Packers in a last second thriller 24-22. The Giants, don't look now, are suddenly one game out of the playoffs, and Tommy DeVito looks like a pretty decent NFL quarterback. Sure, the stats aren't eye-popping. He threw for 158 yards and a touchdown, ran for 71 on the ground. The latter one actually is really good. But Tommy's getting it done. He's efficient. He takes care of the ball. He's relatively decisive in his decision making. He makes good throws and does not make bad ones. And honestly, that's more than a lot of quarterbacks can say. Saquon Barkley, 86 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground. He was great. Wandale Robinson, 6 receptions, 79 yards in the air. He was dynamic all game long. Gosh, Packers defense. Defense, an interception, 2 sacks. Really held their own here. And ultimately, the Giants did enough to win. And this is a type of victory where now this team, one game out of the playoffs, might be able to really turn this season around and possibly, if they get lucky, end up making some noise, possibly into January. Who knows? Maybe they even go on a little bit of a run. The Packers, meanwhile, fall to 6-7. They are still very much in the NFC playoff picture. They're tied with a bunch of other teams for that final wild card spot. Very young team. The Packers are the youngest team in the NFL. You would expect them to have their fair share of struggles like they did in Monday night. Jordan Love, 218 yards and a touchdown and interception. Kind of epitomized that. He wasn't great for parts of the game. He was amazing for others. Just this team is still learning. It's still growing. I wouldn't be surprised if we talk about the Packers next year as like a really, really deep sleeper, as like a really fun on the rise team that's probably going to make the playoffs. But for this year, they seem like they might not just have enough experience in these types of situations and these types of games, which they have now lost quite a bit of. Um, Moving on, covering more of the statistics of the night. AJ Dillon, 53 yards on the ground, 2 receptions, 25 yards. Jaden Reed, 8 receptions for only 27 yards. He did have 38 on the ground and a touchdown as well. Tucker Kraft, 4 receptions, 64 yards. That defense, unfortunately, was not able to get anything going for the Packers. At the end of the day, I've said it a bunch in this segment. I'll say it again. The Packers are inexperienced. They're still learning. These types of games are normal for a young team, the youngest in the NFL, to go through, and they'll ultimately be better because of it. Will they make the playoffs this year? I don't know. They might. They might not. But next year, Packers absolutely are a team that I'm going to watch out for, and one that I think can make some real noise. Thank you so much for watching the Sportsball Network's NFL Week 14 breakdown. If you liked what you saw, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll catch you in the next one.